This episode of the All About Nothing podcast is sponsored by listeners like you and Big Media LLC, encouraging you to check your voter registration. In a world where every voice counts, ensuring your registration is accurate and up to date is the simplest, most effective way to guarantee your vote is heard. Don't leave your participation to chance. Take a moment today and verify your status and stay ready for the next election by visiting theallaboutnothing.com/voter. Welcome, everyone, to the All About Nothing podcast, kind of daily show. I am Barrett Gruber, host of the All About Nothing podcast. You can find me across all of social media at Barrett Gruber. If you want to participate in the show, you can chat with us here on YouTube. You can find links at the top of our webpage, theallaboutnothing.com. Please follow and subscribe wherever you're hearing us. We're going to get started. So, first and foremost, good evening. Right? I mean, welcome back. Pull up a chair, grab your drink of choice. I am glad that you are here, genuinely glad, because I think that we're going to talk about things tonight that matter, not just in a subscribe and leave a 5-star review kind of way. I mean, it actually matters, like a keep the lights on matters. I hope you're all hanging in there. And I know hanging in there is starting to feel like a full-time job with no benefits, no PTO, and a boss who keeps moving the goalposts. Every morning feels like we're waking up to a new, slightly more surreal episode of a show that nobody remembers auditioning for, and yet here we all are, cast members. Before we dive into tonight's fray, I want to point you towards some conversations that are absolutely worth your time. If you haven't yet, go check out the latest episode of the All About Nothing podcast. Yes, the main feed, the full-length version. It's part 2 of my sit-down with Denny LeVay, and we really get into the grit of the revolutionizing rural health care through federal policy. That's over at theallaboutnothing.com, or search for the All About Nothing podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can check the link in the show notes. You wound up here, though, right? I mean, I assume you're probably here on purpose. Questionable, but on purpose. And speaking of Denny, I do want to take a moment here. The Idaho primary results came in last night. Denny didn't take the seat. And I want to say something about that directly because I think it matters how we hold these moments. Running for office, especially for the U.S. Senate, is a profound act, gut-wrenching vulnerability. It is terrifying. It is exhausting. And it's one of the most beautiful and bruising things a human can do to themselves. You are putting your name, your vision, your life up for a public vote. A vote that a stranger gets to take into a curtained booth. And you don't get to explain yourself in that moment. You just have to trust that the work that you put in, the doors you knocked on, the conversations you had at 7 a.m. outside of a diner in Boise, you just have to trust that it added up to something. Sometimes the math doesn't come back in your favor. That doesn't mean the work was wrong. The work of a public servant doesn't end just because of a vote count. Denny LeVay's voice on rural health care, on federal policy, on what it means to actually serve people rather than manage them, that voice will remain part of the conversation. I am certain of that. And I want to offer my sincere, genuine respect to him tonight. Also, I want to shout out the Awakening podcast with Tamara and Heather. Their latest guest, Josh, has a story that will shift your perspective, unlearning the code from missionary kid to mental health therapist. You can find that link in the show notes, or you can visit bigmediallc.com. Please go support them. These conversations are what are holding our culture together. All right, let's get started. I take that back. Before we get into the maps and the money and the geopolitics, I need to stop right here because something is ending this week that I think deserves more than just a passing mention. Something that I genuinely am profoundly and personally grieving. Thursday is the final show of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. 11 years, 1,801 episodes, and Friday morning at 12:35 a.m. Eastern on CBS, the lights will go dark on the Ed Sullivan Theater for the last time. And one of the most important voices in American political satire goes off the air. Not because of the ratings. The Late Show was the most watched late night show in America, averaging 2.7 million viewers, growing even as its competition shrank. Not because the audience left, not because the work stopped being great, but because someone with power decided that The Voice was too inconvenient to keep around. Let me tell you what actually happened, because CBS would prefer you just nod along to the word financial. In July of 2025, just days after Colbert called CBS's parent company Paramount's $16 million settlement with President Trump a big fat bribe on the air, CBS announced the show would end in May of 2026. 3 days. 3 days between Colbert telling the truth on national television and his bosses telling him his show was done. And what was that settlement about? Paramount was in the process of closing a multi-billion-dollar merger with Skydance Media, a deal that required approval from Trump's Federal Communications Commission. Skydance is controlled by David Ellison, son of Oracle billionaire Larry Ellison, a longtime Trump supporter and friend. The elder Ellison was spotted with the president at UFC matches. The pending deal mattered for two reasons. Companies cut costs around mergers, and the deal required sign-off from the Trump administration. So why don't we just follow the money? Paramount needs the Trump administration's FCC to bless an $8 billion merger. Trump sues over a 60-minute interview. Paramount pays $16 million to Trump's presidential library, by the way. Colbert calls it what it is. And 3 days later, Colbert is canceled. CBS called it purely financial decision against a challenging backdrop and late night. But the cancellation came after CBS parents Paramount paid $16 million to settle Trump's lawsuit while Paramount's sale to Skydance awaited administrative approval. Colbert himself said two things can be true simultaneously. I'll say it more directly. The timeline is not a coincidence. That is a transaction. Jon Stewart, Colbert's friend and former boss, put it as well as anyone could when the announcement dropped. Stewart said, "If you're trying to figure out why Stephen's show is ending, I don't think the answer can be found in some smoking gun email or a phone call from Trump to CBS executives. I think the answer is in the fear and pre-compliance that is gripping all of Americans' institutions at this very moment. Institutions that have chosen not to fight." That's not authoritarianism arriving in with jackboots. That is authoritarianism arriving in a boardroom in a business suit with a merger agreement on a settlement check. It's quieter, it's more deniable, and it's far more effective because there's no single moment you can point to and say, that's when the press died. It's just incrementally disappearing. Show by show, settlement by settlement, merger by merger. And here's the part that should make everyone angry, not just the liberals, not just the fans of Colbert, everyone. Between 1983 and 2015, the number of corporations that collectively controlled 90% of the U.S. media fell more than 50 to just 6 companies. 6. And now it's arguably 5. 5 companies controlling what you see, what you hear, who gets a platform, and increasingly, who gets canceled when they say something the most powerful man in the country just doesn't like. The replacement for Colbert's time slot? Byron Allen's Comics Unleashed, with Allen himself vowing the show won't talk about politics. Quote, "We don't talk about anything that's topical," he said. Quote, "I don't care who you vote for." I want you to sit down with that for a second. The slot previously held by one of the sharpest, most fearless political satirists in the history of the American late night, a man who held more accountable, that was held more accountable with a pen and a punchline, is being replaced by a show that has explicitly pledged to not hold any power accountable, not for anything. That is not a programming decision, that is a message. Now, and I'm going to say this directly to any conservatives listening now who might quietly be celebrating this. I get it. Colbert was tough on your team. He was relentless. Sometimes he was unfair. Sometimes the jokes felt more like punches. I understand why that felt personal. But I want you to think about what you're actually cheering for when you cheer for this. You are cheering for a world where a sitting president can sue a news organization, extract a financial settlement, and as a direct result, the most prominent critic of that president loses his show. You are cheering for a world where the billionaires who are friends with the president control the networks, and the content on those networks bends in the direction of that friendship. What happens when it's your voice they want silenced? What happens when the political winds shift? And they always shift. And that machine that just swallowed Colbert decides your favorite commentator, your trusted pastor, or your local journalist says something inconvenient. The mechanism doesn't care about your politics, it cares about your compliance. And once it's built, it doesn't ask permission before it's used. In 1987, the FCC voted to abolish the Fairness Doctrine, the requirement that broadcasters air opposing views on topics of national importance. Congress tried to restore it. Reagan vetoed it. That was the first brick out of the wall, and we've been pulling bricks ever since. A free press is not a liberal value. It is not a conservative value. It is a foundational American value, the one that the founders put in first in the First Amendment, not the Second, not the 10th, not the 5th, because they understood that without it, everything else is negotiable. Stephen Colbert understood that. He said it best himself when he accepted the Emmy. The Emmy, by the way, his show won for Outstanding Variety Talk Series while being canceled. He said he wanted to do a late night show that was about love. And at some point, he realized they were doing something else. They were doing a show about resistance to fear. Thursday night, after 11:35, he takes his final bow. And I'll be watching. And I will be grateful. And I will be fucking furious. And I think you should be too. Whatever side of the aisle you're sitting on. Because when they silence a satirist, the next thing they come for isn't a punchline. All right, let's talk about the map, okay? Not the one you use to find the nearest Waffle House, the one that decides whether your voice in Washington actually carries any weight, whether the person you voted for can ever actually win. Right here in South Carolina, my South Carolina, we've been living inside a fever dream this week. If you've been watching the State House, you've witnessed a masterclass in how to dismantle a democratic process while wearing a suit and calling it governance. We are talking about a marathon, middle-of-the-night sessions, lawmakers literally voting until the sun comes up. Not because the work is urgent and noble, because the cover of darkness is convenient. They are executing what I'm calling a cartographic coup. A surgical strike on the state's only Democratic-held congressional seat, Jim Clyburn's 6th District. Now, let me be clear about what's happening here, because this isn't complicated. They want a clean sweep. Governor McMaster has been whipping this special session into a frenzy, pushing for a map that treats congressional districts like personal real estate, like neighborhoods you can rezone when the tenants start voting the wrong way. When Democrats pushed back and asked for basic transparency, not obstruction, just transparency, the response was to change the rules mid-game. They capped amendments. They slapped timers on debate. As Representative Todd Rutherford put it, cheating in the middle of the game is not winning. That's not a partisan statement. That's just arithmetic. And here's what I want to say to anyone listening tonight who considers themselves a conservative, a Republican, someone who believes in the principles of limited government and local control. Listen to this part. If your side has to do this to win, what does that tell you? If your ideas are popular enough to govern, and I know many of you genuinely, sincerely believe they are, then why does winning require drawing the lines at 3 a.m.? Why does it require removing the only competitive seat from the map? If conservative policy works for South Carolinians, prove it at the ballot box on a level field. The 6th District isn't some accident. It's a product of a 36-year-old peace pact between civil rights leaders and the state's conservative apparatus. A deal made in good faith, held for nearly 4 decades, Now the word from the top is to tear it up, like it never happened, like the people who negotiated that deal didn't matter, like the communities it was designed to protect don't deserve a vote. They're moving the primaries to August. They're rushing this before the midterms. And the speed, that frantic, almost panicked urgency, is itself an answer to the question no one's asking out loud. If you're so confident the voters are with you, why are you so afraid of them? Now, I've been sitting with this a lot lately, and I want to do something a little different here. I want to give you some history because I think one of the most insidious things that's happened in our political culture is that we've lost the memory of what actually is possible. We have forgotten that the America a lot of people are so nostalgic for, the one that stable jobs had, and the affordable houses, and the single income that could actually support a family, that America was not a coincidence. It was a policy choice. And I want to talk about what historians call the Great Compression. From roughly 1933 to 1980, the United States ran an experiment, and the experiment worked. The New Deal gave us Social Security, labor protections, the minimum wage, banking regulations, structures that actually created a floor of dignity. You couldn't fall all the way to the bottom. And that ceiling, the ceiling was still there. You could still get rich in America, but the distance between the floor and the ceiling was manageable. At its peak in the 1950s, the decade conservatives loved to romanticize, by the way, over a third of American workforce was unionized. The top marginal tax rate was over 90%. 90%. God. Eisenhower, a Republican president, not only didn't dismantle the New Deal, he defended it. He called anyone who wanted to roll it back a fool. His words, more or less. And what did that produce? A single income could buy a house, a car, could send your kids to college, take a vacation, retire with dignity. Not because workers were smarter or harder working than they are today, but because the system was designed to let them share in what they built. I want every person listening tonight who's working 2 jobs and still can't get ahead to hear this. That wasn't an accident of a different time. It was a deliberate result of deliberate policy. It was a choice, and it can be a choice again. But then, the 1980s. The movement that took power in 1980 looked at the compression, that narrowing gap between the richest and everyone else, and they didn't see success. They saw a threat to their own dominance, a world where the government was too big because it was too useful to people who weren't in the inner circle. So they spent 40 years chipping away at it. Tax cuts for the wealthy, deregulation, a tax on unions, the privatization of everything that used to be held in common, and crucially, they built a story that said that your neighbor, your coworker, the person who looks different from you or prays a little differently, they're the reason you're struggling, not the reason or not the person rewriting tax code, not the CEO taking hundreds of millions of dollars in severance while your pension gets cut. They turned public service into a dirty phrase. They replaced we with me. And now, right now, in 2026, we are living in the ruins of that project. The gap is not a hill anymore, it is a canyon. And they are busy building walls around the edges so no one else can cross it. Here's what I want to ask to my conservative neighbors tonight, and I mean this with genuine respect because I grew up around many of you, and I know you love this country. Do you remember what you were promised? You were promised that if you cut taxes on the wealthy, the wealth would flow down. You were promised that if you busted the unions, your wages would go up. You were promised that if you deregulated the banks, the economy would boom for everyone. How did that promise hold up? I'm not asking rhetorically, I'm asking honestly, because I think a lot of you, more than the pundits want to admit, know that it didn't. And I think knowing is why the anger has kept getting louder and louder, even as people who were supposed to deliver for you have kept getting richer and richer. The enemy was never the single mom on food stamps. It was never the immigrant in the fields. The compression was killed by people who told you to blame them. And the question now is, do we build it back, or do we keep swinging at each other while they count the money? While they're busy rearranging the furniture in our own house, let's look at what is happening on a global stage, because it connects. Everything connects tonight. The news out of Iran is, look, and I'll be direct, it's frightening. And I don't say that for the drama. I say it because I think we've been normalized into a kind of low-level numbness that how close can some of these situations actually come before it goes catastrophically wrong. Tehran is floating peace proposals that read like ransom notes, reparations, U.S. withdrawal, the works. Washington calling it garbage. And in between those two positions, we have a military strike being scheduled and then called off via social media posts. We are managing a potential regional war through what amounts to a very high-stakes group chat with unpredictable read receipts. The Strait of Hormuz, for those who need geography, is the narrow waterway through which a significant chunk of the world's oil supply travels through every single day. It is also increasingly a choke point for undersea fiber optic cables. We're not just talking about gas prices here. We're talking about the infrastructure of the global internet. That's what's sitting at the center of this standoff. The Iranian regime is threatening to open new fronts if the pressure continues, and every time someone calls for a ceasefire, the terms get more impossible. It's as if the goal isn't resolution, it's perpetual leverage. And the people who suffer in that perpetual leverage are never the ones in the room making the decisions. I want to say something uncomfortable here. Strength is not the same as escalation. Real strength, the kind that keeps Americans safe, requires diplomacy, patience, and the willingness to talk to people you don't like. We learned that during the Cold War. We learned it during decades in the Middle East. And we keep unlearning it every time this administration decides that toughness plays better on television than wisdom. There are military families listening to this right now, parents, spouses, kids. Although, I don't know if that's a good idea, the kids thing, but you deserve leaders who treat the possibility of war with the gravity it actually carries. Not as a tweet, not as a photo op, as the last, most terrible option. One of the biggest things that should be avoided with every diplomatic tool available until there's genuinely no other choice. And then there's this. The Epstein file saga is like a story that refuses to be buried. No matter how many times it gets pushed off the front page by the next crisis, and I want to be clear and careful here because this is a space where conspiracy and fact live uncomfortably close together. I'm not here to speculate. I'm here to point at what is actually happening and ask, why aren't more people more alarmed? We have data volunteers in Denmark and researchers here in the States printing out millions of pages of documents, trying to make sense of all of the redactions. And what they're finding are images of people who are never mentioned in the official record, names that were conveniently absent, victims who were, by the Department of Justice's own admission, badly handled in the redaction process. In the UK, police are investigating decades-old abuse allegations based on what's coming out of these documents. Former ambassadors, royals, people at the highest levels of power, and every time a new uncomfortable truth surfaces, like the missing FBI interviews, or the names that keep appearing in the margins of the documents that were supposed to be sealed, it gets smothered by the next news cycle fire. That's not an accident. That is a system. I'll say this plainly. When you control the redaction pen, you control the story. And the people who are the most desperate to keep those files blacked out are the people with the most to lose from the full picture. That's not a political statement. That is just the oldest truth in power. Accountability is only possible when the light is allowed in. So why does all of what we've talked about tonight connect? Why the gerrymandering in Colombia? Why the chaos with Iran? Why the desperate scramble to keep the Epstein files behind walls of black ink? It's fear. They are terrified of accountability. They know that if the House flips, if the map isn't rigged, if the voters actually get to choose, the floodgates open. The committees get subpoena power. The paper trail that currently ends at the White House door might suddenly, uncomfortably continue into the actual files, into the actual decisions, into the actual names. So they're trying to turn the House of Representatives into an extension of the executive security detail. They're trying to build a closed-loop system where no matter how many people in this country are unhappy, and the polls suggest there are a lot of unhappy people, the math, the rigged and gerrymandered and surgically precise math prevents anything from actually changing. They don't want to govern. They don't want to govern. They want to insulate. And here's the thing. Here's what I want every person listening to sit with, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum. An insulated government is not a conservative government. It's not a liberal government. It is an authoritarian one. The conservative tradition, that actual conservative tradition, the one that goes back to Edmund Burke and Barry Goldwater and even Ronald Reagan at his most principled, the tradition was about limiting government power, about checks and balances, about the danger of concentrated authority. What we are watching right now is not that tradition. What we are watching is a small group of people using the language of conservatism to build a system that is immune to democratic correction. And if you believe in the founding principles of this country, not the mythology, the actual principles, you should alarm. That should alarm you. Full stop. No asterisk. I don't want to leave you just with the weight of all of that, because I think one of the real dangers of this moment, maybe the biggest one, is that the scale of what's happening makes people feel small, makes people feel like there's nothing they can do, like the systems are too big, the corruption too deep, and the maps too rigged. I understand that feeling. I feel it myself. Honestly, right here in South Carolina, recording a podcast into a microphone and hoping the words land somewhere useful. But here's what I know. Walls are expensive. The higher you build them, the more energy you have to spend maintaining the structure, and the less you can invest in the ground you're standing on. The people building these walls are so focused on holding the line against accountability that they're losing the country. The trust is eroding. The discontent is building. It doesn't happen in a single election, but it happens. And what stands against it? Not despair, attention, conversation, the willingness to sit across from someone who votes differently than you do and say, tell me what you actually need. Tell me what you're actually afraid of. Tell me what it looks like when it works. And then to listen, actually listen. I have to believe, the most people on both sides of the divide want something that rhymes with the same thing: safety, dignity, a fair shot, and a government that doesn't make them feel like a pawn. The government is over who gets. The fight is over who gets to define those words and who gets to be included in them. We are in that fight right now, tonight, in South Carolina, in Idaho, in Tehran, in the redacted pages of files that someone really, really doesn't want you to read. It's not just about politics, it's about reality. They want to create a version of the United States where the outcome of every election is decided in a state house at 3 a.m., not by people waiting in line to vote at 7 p.m. after a full shift. But here's the thing about mazes. They have exits. You just have to keep moving, keep paying attention, refuse to mistake the wall for the destination. Before we head out, again, check out the links in the show notes. Listen to the All About Nothing interview with Denny LeVay on rural healthcare. Give the Awakening podcast with Josh a listen. These are not distractions from the fight. These are part of the fight. The part that reminds us why we're fighting. Keep your eyes on the local maps. Keep talking to your neighbors. Yes, even that neighbor. They're moving the goalposts, but the goalposts are not invisible, and neither are we. It's going to do it. It's going to wrap it up for this episode. Big thanks to everybody for watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget, you can follow me across all of social media at Barrett Gruber. Thank you for liking and hitting that bell. And if you can, give us a 5-star review, please, and leave a comment. Until next time, you all stay safe, be kind, and keep your hands to yourself. Well, you've made it to the end. You survived the rambling, the tangents, and whatever nonsense we just subjected your ears to. Congratulations. Now that your brain is sufficiently scrambled, how about doing something productive for democracy? Before you go off to forget everything you just heard, do yourself a favor and double-check that your voter registration is actually legit at theallaboutnothing.com/voter. It's about the only way to make sure your vote counts, even if your taste in podcasts is questionable. The preceding podcast is solely owned by the host or hosts and is distributed by Big Media, LLC. Copyright 2026.